all so much for joining the webinar. I know we're like in the middle of a really, really hectic news week, and we're like definitely conscious of that, and actually going to kind of talk about that up front and sort of address how Young AAJA as a community can kind of be here for one another in kind of some really uncertain times. But before we do that, I'll do a few intros. So my name's Beena. I'm the director of Young AAJA. If we haven't already met, hello. It's great to meet you. And I look forward to kind of talking some more with you. We're hoping that webinars like this can kind of become standard and a good way to bring together our community that is like all across the country in all different time zones. So we're hoping to do things like this, and if you have any ideas of future things that we should cover in webinars, please do feel free to let me know. That being said, I'm going to introduce our three panelists on the webinar. So our first is Hannah Bae, who's a freelance journalist and nonfiction writer. Her work has been published in the anthology Don't Call Me Crazy, 33 Voices Start the Conversation on Mental Health, and the Monocle Travel Guide to Soul, as well as news outlets including CNN, Monocle, Eater, the AP, and more. She is focused on stories about Korean American culture and identity, and she is at work on a memoir. She recently completed an Open City Fellowship in Narrative Nonfiction at the Asian American Writers Workshop, and she was the president of AAJA New York from 2017 to 2019. So thank you for joining us, Hannah.
Thank you.
We also have Lauren Hardie, a freelance copy editor who has worked with the Daily Beast, Viacom, Forecast.News, and other online outlets. She's currently the content editor for Hapa Mag. She was an active member of AAJA from 2012 to 2019, holding positions on the National Governing Board and as the AAJA chapter membership chair. So thank you for joining us, Lauren. And last but certainly not least, we have Karen, a freelance business and culture reporter whose work will be published in the anthology Unspeakable Acts, True Tales of Crime, Murder, Deceit, and Obsession this summer, as well as news outlets including Time, NBC, Glamorous, the SF Chronicle, and more. Karen frequently covers business stories that intersect with race, gender, and diversity. She has a master's from Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism and has been a proud member of AAJA since 2013. So thanks for being on, Karen. All right, so let's go ahead and kick it off, but just first want at the top to kind of talk through some of the coronavirus news. We are really in a position with Young AAJA to use this community as a sounding board, as a support system. I know that members have been posting here and there about different coronavirus related news coverage or you know, just things on their mind. So feel free to utilize the space in that way. And you know, this is kind of our community. And so to the extent that, you know, you want to air out any anxieties or DM folks, I mean, feel free to really use this. This is kind of a collective community space, and we should, you know, in kind of these times, it's a time to really support and come together. I'm sure that our panelists have a couple of thoughts off the top on self-care. I know that that's something that's been talked a lot about in my circles, but if there are any tips that the three of you have on kind of ways that you're taking care of yourself in kind of some uncertain times, we'd love to hear them. And for the rest of you, if you have any tips that you'd like to drop into the chat, anything that's been working for you or any questions you have kind of on this topic, we'd be more than happy. Again, we're going to share this all out afterwards, so it just kind of helps make things stronger the more we share about this. To our panelists, do you have any self-care tips that you'd recommend, anything that's been working for you?
I do.
Go for it.
Particularly as someone who had worked in news, checking out of the news I find is helpful, which I know seems kind of counterintuitive because this is our jobs, but a large part of what keeps you sane and healthy is doing other things that are important to you, walking your dog, you know, reading a book you enjoy, and just finding time and remembering that to be a whole human and to be good at your job often requires taking a step back from the job. And a lot of times social media things kind of just keep you in that world and keep you spinning on things. And yes, a lot of times for your job, you need to be on top of things. But I think for self-care purposes, it's really important to steal those moments for yourself to just kind of turn it off for a bit. Definitely. Along those lines, trying to think carefully about how much social media you're using. If you're, only using like Instagram to like follow animals, that's totally fine. But try to be thoughtful about how much you're using social media to not feed your anxiety. I know for me, like it's been really hard to sleep the past couple days, not only because of coronavirus, but because of various other things going on in my life. And some are very good things too. But yeah, like if you are having trouble sleeping, like I keep my phone outside of my room. And if I wake up in the middle of the night, then I try to count backwards from 1,000 slowly while paying attention to my breath. And I don't think I've even made it to 500 yet, so it works.
Thank you for those tips. Karen, anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think it's important to, I wish you could, I was like, I'm not an admin, but usually I mute whoever's microwaving their dinner right now.
Mute, that'd be great. Thank you.
I think it's really important to also, going back to what Lauren said, I budget for stuff. Like I budget for the food that I know will help me have the right energy to both do my work and like walk the dog or like do my exercise. I budget for money to like see a therapist or go to an activity that I enjoy that will get me off my phone, like whether it be exercise or books, buy books or budgeting time to go to the library and picking up stuff. I've seen a lot of people talk about crafting or pottery classes, like things that you literally can't pay attention to anything else. Like I remember I used to rock climb a lot, and I loved that it was a sport that if you were thinking of anything else, like you would fall off. So I thought, like, I think budgeting when we talk about mental health and just leading into the conversation, like you can do that. Like I remember thinking really hard about reading all these stories about people who were extreme budgeters because they wanted to retire early and how much money they were spending on groceries. And I was like, that would hurt my mental health. The idea of like constantly thinking about if I could afford like nice fruit at the grocery store would like hurt me. And I was like, that's not worth it in the long run just to feel like I had a little bit of extra money. But also, I think it's really important. And that goes all the way down to like medications or, like both prescription and non-prescription medications. I think like I will pay extra for like the nice painkillers that work quicker, all those kinds of things. And then I think it's also just about going back to what Hannah said about habits. Sometimes that can be setting up a group where if you don't do a minimal amount of movement, you have to pay into a fund for something you really don't like, or setting up a habit where it's like, I constantly remind myself that I was like, I'm not a social media editor. It's okay if I don't check Twitter like the hour before I go to bed. And so things like that are really important. And I've seen other people who are online editors, national editors, feel really wedded, especially at this point where it's like there's such a hunger for information. And I know that Beena, with your role, it's like you're constantly just like reading the worst stories of people's lives. So I think I always go back to that metaphor of like oxygen mask on first. Like you can't do this. Everybody's, especially for people like us, it's like the industry can't afford to lose us already, but we have to think about it in terms of like budgeting both mental energy, which is a limited thing every day, and then financially, how do you budget it so that you put yourself in the best position possible? And going back to what Hannah said, I also budget weird stuff like my sleep is very also a high priority, but it's not always consistent. So I budgeted money for like buying blackout blinds and earplugs, and my next goal is like a white noise machine. so and you know, like anxiety about real things, both positive and stress, is out of my control. But like, I think it's really important. Like, this is an investment in my health and well-being on a day-to-day basis, not just my mental health. So I think about that, and I'm just like, I'm always looking out for like a white noise machine on sale, or I buy it used off other people. But I think like those kinds of things can help you figure out like where you want to put your money and energy towards in the short and long term.
Well, that was a perfect transition into our topic for the night, which is money management. So Karen really kicked it off nicely there with just, I think, how budgeting really intersects with mental health and anxieties and guilt and some of these kind of really hard emotional things that we're going to all have to grapple with as we kind of dive into this topic of budgeting. So to take a couple of steps back, I would actually love to hear from our panelists. How do you personally budget? I know there's lots of different tools and apps and spreadsheet templates and all of these things out there. So I'd be really curious to hear if you're open to sharing like what you personally do. Do you, you know, kind of write it out in a spreadsheet every month and like really stick to that? Do you use Mint? Do you use something else? And like, how long did it take you to find a process that really worked for you?
Yeah, I could go ahead and start. I was more thoughtful about budgeting earlier in my career. And now I feel like I'm at a place where I don't have to keep track of everything, but I would say right now, I mean, I definitely use spreadsheets to keep track of like who has paid me and what payments are still outstanding. Just because I'm a freelancer and I need to keep track of like getting paid. I know that recently my husband and I made a big change in terms of our grocery purchasing. We were spending so much money and we love to cook. So like Karen said, we never wanted to be like in a position where we weren't buying like that thing that we wanted, but it was just like, we're spending a ton of money on food. So we recently changed where we shop. Like, I mean, we joined like the Park Slope Food Co-op, which is infamous / famous for its extremely low prices and crowds and required labor of all members. But we've been saving a ton of money and cooking a lot and cooking delicious things. So that's a way that I have budgeted. I haven't really used or had a bunch of luck with like online tools, maybe because I started my career in Korea, so a lot of those tools were not compatible with foreign currencies, and also a lot of my money was changing hands via cash, but I just tried to keep track, you know, just checking my bank account often, and just being very, very frugal. So that's kind of what I did. Karen, did you want to go or do you want me to go? Okay, I'll go. My budgeting journey, I would say, began maybe in about 2005, which is when I moved out. So after college, and I was on my own, and I was really adamant that I didn't want to screw anything up because I didn't want to move home tail between legs, which I did eventually when I went to grad school. But I started paying attention. My friend gave me a spreadsheet and I started tracking everything to the penny. And it was something that I continued to do for a few years until, as Hannah mentioned, and when I moved to Korea, I kind of lost track of that because a lot of things didn't sync because I was using a different account altogether. And that's where I kind of lost my way financially, so to speak. I don't know if that's the best way to put it. When I came back, there were so many things. Beena, you mentioned Mint. Mint is a huge one that's super popular. There are a bunch of other ones. If you haven't heard of YNAB, has nearly a cult following. It stands for You Need a Budget. And I think the premise is that you're giving every dollar a job. It's a really great tool. It costs a little bit of money, but if you follow it well, you're saving in the end, so it makes sense. Another one is Personal Capital. And that one I think is really good if you want like an overview of all your accounts and if you have investments and so on. However, I've tried both of them and neither of them stuck. I even tried Mint. It didn't stick for me for whatever reason. And I've recently gone back to my budgeting spreadsheet that I actually got from an accountant because I have an LLC. So I have to track both personal and business expenses and keep them separate, which is another thing I'll get into if you're interested. But I think ultimately, and this is the biggest takeaway about budgeting tools, the best budgeting tool for you is the one that you actually use. If you only use it sometimes or you don't track everything, it's not a good tool, no matter how well it's touted on any website or whoever gives you the advice to use it. If you're not using the tool, then find another tool. In terms of budgeting, it only works when you do it consistently. And another thing I think is you need to track. Everyone's different. I can tell you scrimp on your groceries and be unhappy, and that's the best way to budget. I think that's terrible advice. But only you know your habits and you know what works for you. So I would suggest whichever tool you use, look back at the last 3 months to get a sense of what your spending habits are, and then you can better see where you can cut. I don't want to cut on my groceries, or I don't want to cut on the quality of my groceries. Maybe I'll shop somewhere else. Maybe I didn't need that outfit or that item of clothing. Even if it was for a conference, maybe I can get something from an AAJA clothing swap. You know, maybe I can ask a friend if I can just borrow that blazer. I'll give it back to her after I dry clean it. And that's cheaper than buying a brand new one that you'll wear twice. So there are all these things that you only really see after you look back at your expenses. You can only look back at your expenses if you've been tracking your spending and keeping a budget. So that's what I think about budgeting. I've gone back to an old school spreadsheet, legit Excel spreadsheet. I don't even have it in Google, but I'm happy to share that with you. I've like blanked out all of my personal information, and I even found out the formula so that it will auto sync and populate to add all the months together, so you can get a year overview and see how much you've spent in each spending category annually. So yeah, another thing, we've touched on this, we'll probably touch on it again, but I made notes that I'm following. In terms of where you can cut money to save, the library has such great resources. Hannah and I were talking about this personally, that we really enjoy Canopy, which I know New York doesn't support anymore, but there's another one called Hoopla. And for those of you who are in on the call right now, I'm not sure where you may be located, but I was a Broward County resident that's in Florida, and I still have my library card. It's still active in Florida, so I have access to Hoopla in the state of Florida. And I'm not cheating because my card has not expired yet. Once it expires, that'll be something different. But maybe you can tap into the library resources that are back at home, and that saves you money on subscriptions like, say, Hulu or Netflix, and you don't have to steal anybody's account information either. So another thing is cell phones. I also have like tips on which cell phone plan you can go with that's more affordable than maybe T-Mobile or any of the bigger ones. You've likely heard of some of them, but I can give you that information too if you're interested. Yeah, and then that way, all the things that you're cheating on in order to save, don't feel like you're actually missing out on the things that you actually enjoy, you know? And this is a time when we're gonna be self-quarantining and we're gonna be at home. We have to eat, and we have to entertain ourselves and not drive ourselves crazy. So we can scrimp but not miss out on the fun stuff, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that's where I'm at with my budgeting journey. I'm also paying attention to all these things in my budget.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lauren. Karen, do you want to chime in? Anything?
I made all these faces because I was like, oh no, I don't do any of those things. I'm terrible. Like, I think I'm still trying to figure this out, but I'm someone who is easily distracted. And so I just set a lot of ground rules for me. I'm in an unusual position because I had really enormous expenses that are unusual, what they call in accounting, like one time only. Like for my work visa, it was moving back and forth to the United States. And so those are not normal things that are parts of budgets, you know, like your day-to-day stuff. And then also I'm trying to transition from freelancing to full-time work, which will be easier because that will mean a much more steady cash flow in a budget. So I set myself throughout, whenever I had a job, especially I can relate to anyone who's early career and didn't earn a lot, I just set really basic ground rules. So like if I would go to the same grocery stores and I would set myself a weekly budget of how much money I would spend based on how much I knew I was taking home. And then now I've also done, so I didn't set, unlike Lauren, I wasn't as organized. I would just set basic ground rules for like try to buy everything on sale, like try not to overspend. So like now I only, the first place I look for stuff is always going to be buy and sell groups, like at the local college. So there's one for every university has one on Facebook. Like in New York City, I comb the Columbia ones a lot, but I know there's also ones for NYU and CUNY and all these other schools. Then it's Craigslist or eBay, or can I get it for free off of these like giveaway groups like Free Cycle or something like that. Then for a long time, I didn't buy clothes, or now I followed Hannah's lightning talk from several years back and I thrift obsessively. So then that's the rule, is like, and I discovered there's a chain in New York City of these high-end thrift shops called Housing Works, where all the rich people, when they want to get rid of last season's stuff or they die, they donate everything. And then the thrift store isn't incentivized to maximize how much it goes for, so they will just sell it in the store for like sort of reasonable prices. And it's all like the designers that I could never afford. And Hannah's lightning talk, which is available online, I think, taught me about what fabrics to look for that would be high quality, that I could like hold on to. Then there were other weird budgeting things. I was like, how could I just, rather than, because like my cash flow is so inconsistent. So I reduced expenses by like teaching myself how to fix stuff I already owned. So like I bought a used sewing machine on Craigslist for $45. And then I've been watching all these things online about how to fix my nicer thrifted quality garments, or the garments I already own. So, and then going back to what we were talking about, it was just like, also, I think it was just about what were the things that were really important. So when we talk about budgeting, I was like, what is the minimum bar? So it was like rent, the groceries that I would like need to not feel sad. And then it was also things like insurance. And then like, I also budget for personal development. So like every month there's a bunch of money, like you can't borrow this from the library, unfortunately. So like going to a AAJA mixer, or, you know, like a talk, or buying a book at something. So like, I think those are things that I budget for that I can't figure out how to like do. But then there's also stuff that I'm always looking for, like volunteer opportunities to reduce costs, stuff like that. Then there's also spreading out the cost of things like vacations, or it was going to be literally my next work visa, just be like, how much money do I have to set aside in like an envelope or an extra account? But the old way that I would do, I was like, if you were like me and is like an Excel spreadsheet freaks you out, or like I really recommend these apps like Mint and stuff like that, is just being like, think really, really hard about like, I really, it's so sad because they just shut it down. I really wanted to see like company. And so I was like, how can I make that work? And I was like, okay, I'm going to ask someone, like I asked my boyfriend for that as my birthday gift. Or it was in the case of, like, what are the things that you, like a concert where you're like, I don't know if they're ever going to come back in town, or they reunited, you know, those are the things that you can't figure out a workaround. I think also I've swapped services with people to save money, so that never shows up in your budget. That it was also just being like, I think also, what was the other rule? It was like, okay, so we covered food and clothing and networking. Oh, it's also like MetroCard and gas, right? Like if you drive, then you have to budget in like how much are you paying for your car and maintenance and insurance. You cannot go uninsured, right? And then it's also, and for New Yorkers or other people in other cities, it's like the MetroCard is non-negotiable in some cases. But also it was just like, what is the stuff where you're like, if I cut that out, I would be really sad. Or also like, if I got that, it would help my life on a regular basis. Like I remember when I bought the sewing machine, I was like, I could save that $45 and not get it. Or I was like, then I would have to hand sew everything. And I was like, that's very silly. But I think the budgeting thing is also it's really important to think about. I was talking about it with Hannah, like I budgeted also now more for fixing stuff that I have. So in addition to the sewing machine, I bought this thing called shoe glue. So I can repair the bottoms of my shoes for $7. It was like in the color that I needed. And I was like, this costs a little bit of money, and it means that I can wear the shoes I already own for a lot longer. And I can also repair the ones, like now I don't care as much if I scuffle because I can fix the shoes really easily. So things like that I think can help. But it's also, I know that not everyone can be super organized and diligent, which is why I think you need to automate. Oh, that was the other thing. I think automation is really, really important. So the old thing I used to do, which now you can set up, is if I saw my checking account, which when I used to have a permalance job or a full-time job, whenever I would see the paycheck go in, and if it rose to a certain balance, then I would automatically, in my head, I would just be like, oh, it's time to transfer some money to a savings account. And now you can do that. So you can automate, like we automate credit card payments and all this other stuff. You can say, you know, every other week you want to transfer it, like you can start as low as like $20 or $50 or as high as you want to go. And then I think that's really helpful. And then setting aside, you can open as many accounts to be like, this is for vacation fund. There's an app that I can't remember off the top of my head that Caroline Moss recommended that you can like literally see on your phone and set aside for different things like vacations and emergency funds. And when I get that link, I'll post it in the group.
I actually bank with Ally Bank, and they've just started a thing now where they have, I think they call it buckets, where you can take that one savings account and just put it into different categories instead of spreading your money to different accounts. But it's the same principle where you do want to allocate certain things for certain things in advance, and being able to see that visually is really, really helpful. It's hard to keep it all in your head. But yeah, automate as much as you can, because that takes, you're helping future you. It takes the pressure off of present you just to do a little bit of planning in advance.
Totally. And along the lines of talking about banking, one thing that I only did like in the less than 5 years ago was to switch my banks over to banks that don't charge ATM fees, that reimburse you for any ATM fees. So like Ally is one that has ATM fee reimbursements up to a certain level, but then there's also Charles Schwab Bank, I think, has unlimited ATM reimbursements, including foreign transactions. So, you know, for someone like me or Lauren, we travel a lot overseas, and like we both do Schwab because we're like, oh, we know we're going to be withdrawing from foreign ATMs. And also with like putting my savings account in Ally. At the time, I chose Ally because it had the best savings. They had the best APR interest for savings accounts. So that's how I ended up choosing that, because I knew like if I opened a savings account with like Bank of America, if it like dropped below a certain level, they were going to charge me fees. And like a lot of other banks, like even just for your checking account, they'll charge you like a couple dollars a month to maintain your checking account. So it's like really try to avoid those little tiny things that add up.
I think this is a good moment to sort of segue into our second topic, but I wanted to, and these are like such thoughtful tips, and I wish I had known them when I was starting out. I wanted to offer like one other, or I guess two other things that really helped me that maybe could help some of you too. So I had no idea how to budget. I think that some of the things, the really thoughtful stuff that you all brought up, it seems to be kind of along the lines of figure out what's important to you. That is kind of your roadmap. I had no idea what was important to me, and would have like massive money guilt, massive spend guilt, to the point that like I wouldn't go out to eat. Like I would like try to restrict all of this stuff because I just had no idea how to manage my money. And then when I moved to New York, I decided to kind of reverse engineer all of it. And so I was like, let me just start with figuring out what I spend every month and like where I'm putting my money. And then let me kind of then use that as like the roadmap of like, okay, where can I cut costs and what really is important to me within all of this stuff that I'm spending. So I would encourage you, if you feel at all stuck or feel like you don't know what to prioritize or don't know what you should prioritize, maybe starting with like what you're doing right now and then kind of working backwards. It really helped me, so maybe it could help you. The second thing I would offer is actually a tip from a colleague, where she was talking about one way to cut costs we all know is like going out to eat, obviously within reason. So I've heard multiple things on this, but one really helpful thing was if you genuinely don't want to go out to eat, it's okay to offer up to your friends, hey, could we do something else? And it sort of took me a long time to like get to that point where I think I was comfortable enough with what I wanted to spend money on that I was able to offer up, like, could we do something that's a little bit cheaper, a little bit more of like a cost-effective option? And also, if you are going to go out to eat, be careful of the big group brunches, because you might go in thinking, cool, I'm just going to get like a side and a coffee and spend like $7. But usually at the end of those, they're going to be like, why don't we all just split the check? So, I mean, be cautious of those situations. And then if you are going into them, like, enjoy it, live a little, right? Like, everybody's going to be spending money and you're going to split it in the end. So might as well enjoy and like eat and have a good meal. Those are kind of two very different things that I've learned along the way. Can we talk a little bit we were getting on the topic of banking, and I think it's a good time to talk a little bit about credit cards and how to choose one, and like where you even go to kind of research and figure out, like, there's so many out there. There's so many like little mailers that you get with like American Express telling you to get their credit card. So how do you even sort of make sense of everything that's out there?
Oh, I have some thoughts on
this. Especially because I sold credit cards. I was a bank teller. Well, I was a bank teller for 3.5 years. So I know a lot about credit cards from the perspective of like, what is it like to sign up for one at your local bank? And by the way, for group bills, I always bring emergency cash. I put like $30 to $40 in my wallet. It in Cantonese, it was, my mom taught me, it was like runaway money. So the preemptive way to avoid the group bill always is to bring cash. That way you can just be like, nope, I know exactly what I did. Here's, 20%, including tip and whatever taxes, like scoot, I'm gonna go to the bathroom now, bye. Like, so you are just like totally out of the conversation of like whose card is whose, like whatever. But regarding credit cards, so there are lots of different resources, Bankrate, Nerd Wallet, Wirecutter has done different ones. I think the thing to remember right now, there's a lot of emphasis, ironically, about travel benefits, which have all been suspended. But I think the thing is, never sign up for something, don't be lulled into your initial reaction, which will be like, oh, the first 6 months, there's a really low interest rate, or this will let me get into all these lounges, but there's an annual fee of like a couple $100. It's like the most basic thing that you want, or give me lots of points. I was like, okay, so the most basic thing that you want is something with a low annual interest rate, and that will give you cash back, because that's something you can use right away, that you don't have to be like tied into like, what if you decide to sign up for like an American Airlines credit card and you hate American on your first flight? Then you're stuck. So I think that's a big one. And then it's also, before you even sign up for a credit card, just think about like, what are you going to use it for? If you're a person who knows that you can pay it off every month because you're going to be buying essentials like groceries, gas, your Metro card, like, your occasional coffee or pastry at work, and you will pay it off every month, then the interest rate doesn't matter, right? You could sign up for like an American Express or whatever. But if you're a person that will carry a balance, or you are considerably worried about the credit card, enabling you to buy all sorts of wacky stuff online that you cannot afford, then you are like, and then like right away, that's a totally different conversation. So you have to remember also, the credit card is incentivized to give you too much like credit and enable you to spend too much, and then you have to make lots of interest payments. The other thing to keep in mind is, like Hannah said, you have to also look at cards specifically for what you're going to use them for. If you travel a lot for work, right, and you're constantly going to use the card to track your expenses so that you are not incurring them on a monthly basis, then that is very different, because the credit card will help you, in addition to taking a picture with your phone religiously for receipts, because they'll always get lost somewhere. Then that will help you be like, oh, I have a digital paper trail in addition to my paper receipts on the credit card statement, and you're setting it aside saying, like, I travel a lot, then I am not personally incurring the cost. It's not coming out directly from my bank account through my debit card for work expenses. Then you have a little bit of leeway. But if it's like, or you're using the credit card because like sometimes you also get currency credit cards. Like when I was in Canada, we had US dollar credit cards to shop online so that you could take advantage of the exchange rate. There are also credit cards that are specifically as benefits, like you shop at Macy's a lot, or Costco, or all these other ones that you can sign up that you need essentially to like participate in these discounts or whatever. The other thing, like, so for someone like me, like it's easier for me to open a Macy's credit card and build credit in the United States for the members in Yung AAJA who are international than for me to get a credit card through a major bank. If you just want a card at a major bank, the other thing you need to do, just like with all of your contracts and your like offers, is you have to read the contract for the credit card. You have to understand, like it looks really boring, but you have to know like how much are the fees if you went to a like ATM. What if you get a cash advance? Don't cash advance. Don't do cash advances. Like don't do it. Like what is, what happens if you buy on something online and you click the wrong currency? Like all of that stuff you have to know in advance. What does it mean if you carry a balance? How quickly can the annual interest rate increase if you accidentally forget to make a payment? What are the programs like that they advertise versus what is actually in effect? Like Discover, I think on the first year will give you twice as much cash back. So that incentivizes people to spend, but it doesn't actually tell you, you have to also remember if you sign up for certain credit cards, they're not always widely accepted. Like especially the ones with like Discover, sometimes it used to be Amex. And then it was also, it depends on the rewards. And remember also, like if you're, like I have a credit card just for emergencies. And then it's also just about like, if you're not going to use this credit card a lot, or you're using it as an emergency, then it's just like, it's not worth it to have something that is really expensive, right? Like you just want, like I said, something with cashback or low annual interest rate. And then also here's another thing is if it's with a different bank, then you have to log in, like the person who is easily distracted. Like then you have to log into another app instead of if it's just the one that's with your existing bank already, then you can see it all in one page, right? Like, so like what would make it easier for you? So first check with the bank that you already have. Like, is there anything there that would fit what you need? And then if not, then like, what is the best option at another institution? And like Lauren said, like, how do you automate it? Like I have so many Google Calendar alerts for being like, pay your credit card like 3 or 4 days earlier than the actual monthly deadline. So I don't forget. Same thing with rents, all of that stuff. And then at the end of the day, do not buy anything with the credit card that you don't think you can afford unless it's a real emergency. Like that's really, really, really important. That's like I saw so many people as a bank teller who would just like cash advance on one credit card to pay another credit card and do this horrible cycle because they were trying to sign up for introductory bonus rates. Like people can play this game, but it can require so much energy. And unless you're like an Excel wizard, and it's just like the people who play that game where they try to buy all those internet mattresses and return them before they have to keep them. Like it's just like you want to simplify your life. You're a young person. Use that energy to work on your career or like ask AAJA questions about like job applications or getting to national or all the other stuff. Like there are less stressful hobbies than chasing the credit card game. And that's my short lecture from literally working at a bank for 3.5 years.
I think that was excellent information, getting the insider take on from somebody who is selling it, telling you like, okay, don't buy it. But yeah, I second that. I absolutely think get a credit card and make it work for you. If you're getting a credit card and you're paying fees and you have an annual fee that doesn't benefit you in any way, or you're getting points that you never use, like what's the point in a travel card if you know you have no trips planned? What's the point in getting points that you can't use to purchase anything you need? You need groceries, you need to pay your rent. It does make sense if, say, you do have a trip planned and you're working toward that and you're going to be diligent about paying it, but ultimately you want to make the card work for you. You don't want to work for your card. The only thing that I did want to add is if anybody has a side business, or if they have an LLC in order to do independent contractor work, separating your journalism work from your daily expenses, I highly recommend getting a separate business card because it helps you track your expenses that are related to your business rather than trying to figure out, oh crap, I went to a coffee shop, was that work related or was that personal? And then you start, getting into this nitty gritty with like $3 here and there, which is a big pain. So that's the only thing I would add, that it is worth it to get a separate business card to separate your expenses. And I do have like a couple resources online. I think somebody had mentioned NerdWallet and Bankrate as great resources. There's also the Points Guy. If you are interested in credit cards, a lot of times it's more travel focused, but a lot of times it really is just a side-by-side comparison, the pros and cons of credit cards, breaking it down in a way that's really easy for you to understand, even though I still recommend you read the fine print on your own. And then Lending Tree has a compare cards feature, which is also really good. And recently I learned about this person named Paco de Leon, and the website is the Hell Yeah Group. And the newsletters are really fun and informative about finances in general. And I think that can be a good resource, although I don't know yet, I haven't tried, but I wouldn't recommend paying to sign up for the services that are offered. I can't vouch for those, but I also think keep your money in your pocket.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that since we only have a handful of other participants, like I definitely want to make sure that we leave a lot of time for questions. And we want to make sure this call is working for you. So let us know how we can help. And remember, we're not professionals. We're just peers who don't advise people on their finances for a living, but we're just talking about what's worked for us as individuals.
Totally. To that point, if you have questions or other things that you'd like us to discuss, please feel free to drop them in the chat, or even because we have a really small group, feel free to just chime in and unmute yourself and ask it. Either way works. So Isha.
I have a question.
Great.
First off, thank you all so much for hosting this for us, and also power to the ladies. Like, this is so awesome. Sorry if I randomly tap in and out. My internet's not that great and I'm on my phone, but I wanted to ask, so I'm actually moving to New York in a few months, and something that I'm repeatedly told is just like, you're always going to feel poor. And I'm like, great, I already feel that in LA. But I do think that it will be to a different level, especially not having the cushion of different school jobs and things like that. I'm wondering, how do you deal with financial anxiety? Because I feel like so much of it is really the emotional impact that my finances have on me, less so than even the nitty-gritty budget aspect of it.
Hannah, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I think all of us have been there. I mean, like Lauren, Beena, Karen, and I either live in New York now or have lived in New York before. And I think all of us have been in a position where we have been like scrimping and pinching in the city. So one thing to know is that you're so not alone, and that you have people like us to vent to talk to. Yeah, so thinking about like the emotional weight of really being on a budget and like the financial stress. I mean, I would say like try to take advantage of ways to release stress and enjoy yourself that cost little to no money. And in New York, there are so many ways to do it. Like, I mean, we have so many beautiful parks in the city. Our libraries have incredible programming. Like, I live near the Brooklyn Public Library Central Library, and they have like jazz concerts and amazing authors coming and speaking, and film screenings with directors speaking. And at so many different New York Public Library branches, they have like free classical music concerts, or just incredible speakers. And and God, like every independent bookstore around the city like has tons of free author events. So it's just so cool what our city has to offer. So if you can find ways to like experience joy without feeling stress, like that's a huge part of it. And then I know like New York seems really expensive, but LA is really expensive. So if you've been able to manage there, I think you're on good footing. And remember, like you won't have, I don't know if you have a car right now, but you won't have to have that necessarily in New York. And we're so lucky to have this, you know, flawed but existing public transit system. So thank goodness for that, because, you know, car rides really add up. And so if you can take public transit as much as possible. But I hope that just that idea of like finding ways to de-stress about your finances that make you feel good can really help. I hope that helps.
No, it does. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Hannah. That's it.
I have an opinion on my personal anxiety. I think a lot of it stems from the unknown. I think not knowing, I think that's where, I think that's a lot of my anxiety stems from not knowing what's going to happen, or where I am, or how my financial standing ranks amongst peers, right? Because there's so many questions, and that's what really freaks me out the most. And I think the only way I can really get a hold on that is to pay attention to what I do know. And this is what I was talking about earlier with, if you start tracking your spending and you look back at the last 3 months, you know for a fact where your money went for the last 3 months. Then you know where you can cut, or where you need to earn more or something. You'll have a better sense of what you really can afford when it comes to, say, how much can I afford in rent, or, you know, can I afford to live that far away because then my commute will have to be this long, or a lot of questions can start getting answered when you just have a better sense of where you are. So I think if you have that, let's say you already do know what you do have, or what you can afford, or what you can't afford, and you're still feeling uncertain. And like Hannah was saying, there's so many resources where you can connect with people and say, all right, you're on the ground in New York. Realistically, what am I getting myself into? You know, what might I be looking at in terms of what I'll need to put aside for rent? Or there's a thing in New York that a lot of other places don't have: broker's fees. And a lot of people who live in New York will tell you that's kind of its own version of a scam. Avoid it if you can. You know, there are all these other things that, you know, it's difficult to prepare for when you're not on the ground, but there are places you can go to get help. If you are still looking for an apartment, there are a bunch of really good resources looking for that as well. And then, you know, as Hannah was talking about, there are a lot of things that are a lot more affordable. You know, there are co-ops that I don't think we had co-ops in Florida when I lived in Florida. Maybe things have changed, but there are things that exist in New York that do make life a lot better, and oddly enough, more affordable than other major cities.
There are co-op houses. I didn't even know about.
Yeah, you can live in a co-op.
There's this beautiful house around the corner that another AAJA lived in.
Yeah.
And the rent is like way below market price. And it's like, it looks
There's
like
a big
sort of high maintenance.
Yeah, there's a big asterisk that comes with that type of living. However, if money is what you're concerned about, those options exist, and they don't always exist in other places.
Yeah. And it can be a reward, and it's like built-in friends.
Yeah. Or a different version of anxiety,
yeah,
depending on how you look at it. Yeah. But does that start answering your question? Or Karen, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, Kitty, it's cheaper for me to live in New York than Toronto, actually. So I will say, I echo what Lauren and Hannah said. I live in a rent stabilized apartment, so I didn't have to pay a broker's fee, and it is below market. And there are also options like people who have moved here for graduate school, there are also off-campus housing websites that are specifically looking for young people and students to rent to. And if you know someone like me, I can help you look at places that are looking to rent through friends of friends and things like that. There are also places to look for cheaper rent. Like, I have never ordered takeout the entire time I've lived in New York, which astonishes people. And I also inherited a really fancy coffee machine. So I don't buy coffee almost. I very rarely buy coffee outside. But I also work from home. And I think regarding cost of New York, it's really easy to be fixated just like the comparison or the FOMO of like, oh my God, I missed out on this concert or I missed out on this great event. And constantly I just like walk around or I take the subway and I was like, people from around the world come to visit New York to just like ride the subway or to like look at the Empire State Building and stuff like that. So I think that's really important. And then I think like what they said, it's still cheaper to take the subway, which is going to be so clean by the time you arrive because they've been cleaning it twice a day. Like, and that normally doesn't happen. Like, that's still cheaper having owned a car in Toronto than maintenance and gas and, you know, upkeep, parking, you know, concerns of insurance, concerns about like being hit or robbed all the time. And then it's also just about, with the cost of New York, there are weird things that you can do, like free things, like lots of programs, like if you're coming here for school, like you don't have to pay if you go to a lot of museums. Like at the Met, they ask for, you know, a specified donation. There are also other free institutions. And like, there are also weird things that are like, I graduated from Columbia 2 years ago. I still go to their events open to the public all the time. There are lots of retirees there too. Like, there's a weird amount of world-class programming in the city at NYU, at Pace, at all these other institutions at the public library that are free. And it's just like, I think that can really help you not focus as much on the stuff that you're missing out on that costs a lot of money.
Totally.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you so much to all of you. I will be at those free events. But thank you.
And like, definitely reach out to us.
Of course, definitely.
Thanks, Kitty. What other questions do folks on the line have? Anybody?
Claire? Does anybody else have questions?
Hi, I had a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. All right. Also, that was definitely me with the microwave before. I didn't know how to mute myself. But I'm
Okay.
I'm quitting my restaurant job soon, and I'm gonna try to freelance full time, which I've never done before. And right now, I'm maybe writing like one article per month, which isn't really enough to live on. So I was wondering if you all are pitching all the time, or how do you make full-time freelancing work?
Wow, Karen.
It's just like
the right people.
We could do an entire hour-long talk on how to make freelancing work. I think this is like a perpetually popular topic at national conferences and regional events. I think Hannah and I both have very different approaches, and we talk about it all the time. But yeah, I mean, and I want Hannah to chime in. I think the important thing is it is different for every single freelancer, and there are lots of resources online. But the most important thing I want you to know is that there is a lot that isn't said by even the people giving advice. Like, they might have a rich or financially secure partner that helps them when invoices are late. They might have had a long-term connection to the industry, or they went to a very prestigious writing or journalism program and didn't have to pay for it. Like I am very open about disclosing that I struggled a lot, but I didn't have to pay for graduate school through scholarships. And I pay that forward every day that I can. So like, I want you to know the freelancing thing is also, for a lot of people, freelance writing like journalism especially is not all, if not even majority of the income. That's extraordinarily difficult and rare because the rates now are just so hard, especially if you're currently starting out or if you're not famous. Like I can't believe that I do it because I've mixed in, and Hannah and I have talked about this, like I've done copywriting for corporations and nonprofits and what they call content studios, like every company, like the Washington Post and the BBC and the New York Times and the Globe and Mail, like that stuff pays way more than journalism. And the most prestigious magazines, like Condé Nast magazines, pay very, very little to nothing, what feels like nothing for journalism. So I want you to know that, like a lot of people also do writing that doesn't get read widely, that's super niche and focused on trades like healthcare, mining, trucking, that kind of thing. That stuff pays super well, but doesn't get read as widely as, say, like an article on Refinery 29. And then the other thing is, it's really important to have a financial cushion because people pay late all the time, or they wait. Like I remember submitting an article in February and it didn't get published until May. And I'm still fighting to get paid for that article now because people will make all sorts of excuses for not paying all the time, even places with serious amounts of money. So that is a huge problem. And then the other thing about freelancing is that it's not for everyone. It requires an amount of organization and vigilance and energy that is like, I have heard stories from Pulitzer Prize winners, and they're just like, we're not in this. This is too stressful. Like, the financial insecurity can be really hard. There's no off days. I have taken my laptop on every vacation in the last 5 years, like all sorts of crazy stuff. I often recommend, I teach people how to freelance, like how to pitch. Hannah and I have either consistent clients, what we call anchor clients, or like I get pitches from editors. Like I don't always cold pitch editors. Like people will come to us and be like, we have seen your stuff, right? Like Hannah does this great illustration and writing stuff. So people will come to us and be like, someone recommended you, you do this great stuff. We read your other stuff. We want to hire you. And then we were like, we will charge you double because you came to us. But like, I think there's stuff like that. But that's also like, it took a long time for both of us to just like slog it out and get to that point. And when you're first starting out, it's also just like you're picking, like people often pay very little. There's lots of disclosures about that. And it's just like, it's really, really hard. It's, going back to what I said, I often recommend people freelance part-time, like you said, like once a month or once every couple of weeks, next to something else that's more consistent, so that you're not waiting for the check to pay your rent and your essentials. And you could do a lot. Like I leapfrogged a lot of things by freelancing part-time. But like my first major freelance story, it took me 2 years. And like I didn't get paid for the entire 2 years that I was like incurring expenses and reporting on that a couple of hours every week until like, and even the last 2 weeks, or you know, like when I did the Time story, I did it 5 weeks straight of like easily 8 to 10 hours a day for every day. And then it came out, and then I also had to incur a lot of expenses. I had to use my debit card and pay for like everything from translation and long distance phone calls, tabs, and all that stuff. So it can be really stressful. The other thing, and we can talk about this later, or you can message us, is I recommend grants for the cash flow stuff. There are lots of really great grants if you have an investigative or unusual story idea. People will give you money upfront, which is astonishing, so that you're not in this like deeply financially stressful hole that we just talked about. I recommend that. Anyways, I'm sorry. Like that is just like the condensed version of everything that I've learned so far.
Yeah, just echoing what Karen said. I know so many talented journalists who are freelancers who have other jobs to pay for that. Like I freelance as a copywriter. I do like digital strategy for non-news organizations, or like I've done some work for like Quartz's branded content side. So, you know, I was getting paid by the Atlantic media, like back when the Atlantic owned Quartz, but yeah, like it wasn't because I had a byline on anything. And you know, I've done like social work, like social media work for news organizations. So like my name isn't anywhere on it, but it's like I still got paid. And yes, about grants, like AAJA has really great resources because one of our members is Jin Ding. I think she's at the Women's Media Fund now. She was at the Pulitzer Center before, but like she's very vocal about sharing grant opportunities especially for women journalists. And then there are all kinds of like local organizations too. So definitely look into different ways to fund your reporting, like SAJA. Like a lot of AAJers are also in SAJA, and like SAJA will give you grant money if you apply for like doing a story. And what else would I say? Oh yeah, like I know like AAJers who are extremely talented who are like part-time baristas because it supports their ability to produce their craft in journalism. So there's like no shame in doing any of that. And I didn't know about this really until I moved to New York, but it's so common for like anyone in any creative field. Like my butcher is like in entertainment and comedy, and you know, it's amazing.
I think that's so important to remind all of us all the time that there's no shame. And I think this is something I thought about coming into this group. I was thinking like, oh, who signed up and like what's the demographic? And then I had to remind myself like most of my peers are so type A, but we don't think we're type A. So we're comparing ourselves to a peer group of other type A's, and it's like all this pressure, and it's not real. You know, there is no shame in having a job, whatever the job is. If it's a barista or you clean houses, or like this is part of your hustle, and this is part of getting you to where you want to be. And nobody here is going to shame you for it. And if they do, they're probably not real friends. But in terms of resources for securing other types of freelance work, particularly media adjacent, but not specifically journalism work, there was an AAJA who had spoken at a conference a couple years back, and her name is Catherine Reynolds Lewis. Reynolds Lewis is hyphenated, and she had compiled a great collection of resources. I believe if you Google her, you can still find a lot of stuff that she's spoken about or advice that she's given. Thanks for posting her name in the group. But also, as an AAJA member, you may have access to archives of things that she may have put together. And if not, maybe amongst us, we can figure out like how to find or source some of the things that she had spoken about. But I remember she had given some great resources, and touching on what Karen had spoken about, that was the first time I'd ever heard of going into non-journalism content writing as making that much more money to support your journalism writing. Because you're using essentially the same skill sets, you're just selling yourself in a different way. So that's a great way to scratch the same itch, so to speak. You know, not necessarily working a food service job and journalism, but that's a great way to maybe supplement the journalism income. And again, you won't have a byline, but you have a fatter paycheck, so it's worth it.
Yeah, one group also that is really helpful in terms of knowing like who's accepting pitches and stuff is Study Hall. Their website is studyhall.xyz. I'm not a member, but like I think for women of color, it's like $1 a month to join, and it's like a listserv where you get info about like who to pitch, which editors, you know, what they pay, all kinds of great information. And then also, I think I can speak openly about this since none of us are male. There are secret Facebook groups called Binders. There's also one called like Rioters of Journalism. And if you want to be added to any of them, let me know. But they have like binders of writing jobs, binders of like digital journalists, and binders of like food writers and stuff like that. So depending on like what you want to cover and you know what you're open to. There are all kinds of ways to like find out. And another great feed is the Writers of Color Twitter feed. They often will retweet calls for pitches and also are very aggressive about asking how much they pay. So that's good.
Yeah. I was going to say that about Writers of Color. I love whoever runs their Twitter feed because they are really quick to snap at any job post that doesn't post how much it pays. Excellent resources and excellent advocates. And I think that's something to also look out for when you're trying to get work. I mean, people know the position that we're in, and it's easy to get taken advantage of. And I know that's something that you're sensitive about, but you also really need the work. So when you go to resources like this that are trusted, it feels a lot safer knowing that they're advocating for the work that we're doing. Should we move on? We are already at just after 8 o'clock my time. Yeah.
So I think we'll probably do it for 10 more minutes and then kind of wrap it up. I know we have some other topics that we had hoped to touch on, but they're kind of big topics. And so we don't need to like get into them all the way now. We can even, do another webinar and talk through them. But I think we wanted to talk some more about student loans and taxes, which are two very big topics to tackle within 10 minutes. So actually my suggestion would be like, let's table it for now and let's like talk through any other questions that are on the line, because these are really solid and smart questions. So if anybody else has anything they want to ask, go for it. On the topic of taxes, I'm going to share one thing that we did at ProPublica that I think could be helpful for other folks. It's called the ProPublica Free Tax Guide, and it's a series of articles that kind of coaches you through like understanding where your tax refund is, how to file your state and federal taxes for free this year, what is the earned income tax credit, and do I qualify for it? So while we didn't touch on everything in this call on those topics, hopefully you can read through these and feel free to holler if you have any questions. I know we're kind of coming to that season, and perhaps a lot of us are going to be spending a bit of time at home over the next couple of weeks, so it could be a good opportunity to knock it out and get the chore that is taxes done. So feel free to holler if you have any questions. But yeah, the line is open. We can talk about whatever is going to be most helpful for you all. So Claire, I know you're on. I don't know if you had any questions or anything that you wanted to chat about.
No, I don't think I have any questions. Yeah, I would love to hear more about the taxes and stuff, I guess.
Then should we try to tackle it?
I mean, I'll say that like for me, it's been really helpful to hire an accountant, because I did my taxes for a while when I was just a W-2 worker, and for years, and I did it when I was in Korea. Like I filed my state taxes in Virginia and my federal income tax return, but I did it wrong like the first time I moved to New York, and so then I hired an accountant. And at the time, the money that you use to pay for an accountant, it was tax deductible on your next year's return. I don't know if that's still the case anymore, but yeah, for me, especially as a freelancer, it's really helpful to have an accountant, but it's not for everyone, but that's one thing.
That was on if I had one line to say about taxes, that was going to be my thing, which ties into the budgeting that we talked about in the beginning, which is in the beginning of the year, you know that you have certain things coming up, right? Like Karen had mentioned, maybe it's a holiday or something that's a bigger ticket thing, or maybe it's, the one-time expenses that you have to pay for your visa. That's something that is coming up in a few months. Put aside a little bit for it. And I think if you start from now to put aside for taxes for next year, you'll have the money to pay an accountant to help you with the stress, which also I think falls into that category of, say, the things you don't want to scrimp on. Like I believe we can have our cheats and treats, but we shouldn't have only cheats and treats, right? So having nice groceries or having that one tub of ice cream that you make last for the month, it's not like your entire lifestyle is lattes and avocado toast, but you have these things that you really do enjoy because it makes you whole and sane as a person. And I think that's what an accountant is. An accountant is like, if I only get a massage once a year, this accountant is like the massage for my finances that I'm going to spend the money on just once a year for the peace of mind. And I think it's absolutely worth it. Totally understand that it's not within everybody's budget, but if you do have something that's a little hairier and more complex, which happens often when you're a freelancer, just having somebody who's a professional guide you through it, I think is totally worth it.
That being said, also, it's really important to remember if you have a really simple tax return, like you said, where you're on staff in W-2 and you don't have like all sorts of wacky investments or things like that, remember that you don't have to pay TurboTax or all these other services. Like when in doubt, go for the free option and double check the services that are free. I also recommend an accountant because I get to pay both American and Canadian taxes. So I am doubly concerned about being audited or screwing up. But I think it's one of those things to remember that there are increasing number of articles, including one at ProPublica, about how you don't have to pay. Lots of people pay every year because they're worried, but that's because these corporations have incentivized scaring everybody into thinking about paying. And especially if you're young and you have a very simple return with not a lot of things to input, then remember that that's a very real option, and that there are lots of guides that are free for you to double check that you don't need to pay for your tax return. It's also worth remembering that there are specific programs. Sometimes, like I still use, if you're a student, often they offer services that are discounted, or even for alumni, that can also help. When it comes to budgeting and everything, like there used to be programs for insurance through the University of Toronto that you can get discount, like car insurance. And also if you're a student, because I know that there are some members of International Yung AAJA, there are specific programs that are for international students because you have different tax forms, especially if you receive a scholarship or stipend. And those are things to remember for the people who are watching this at a later date.
I didn't know this until recently, but irs.gov is a great resource. Like, go to the IRS website and it'll tell you about you, and it's actually legit and you can trust it. And it will point you to a lot of those free places. It will point you to the versions of places that you can file your taxes for free. And I've heard, but I haven't verified, that you can call and talk to somebody who can help guide you through stuff, but I haven't tried it, so I don't know. But yeah, regarding taxes, oh gosh, there was one other thing I wanted to tell you and I forgot. So moving on.
Oh, I always do registered mail. I have to do a paper.
Oh.
I have to do a paper return because I'm not an American. And so I always get registered mail, so I track it so that if they say, oh, we didn't receive your return, I was like, I have this slip of paper that shows that I filed it on time and the U.S. Postal Service can check it. So that's my receipt, preventing me from future penalties.
Yes, Lauren is right. Karen is right. One time I got charged like a penalty because I had filed my taxes late, and I called them and I was like, no, I'm sure that I sent it. And then I did talk to a human being. They were there, and they said they could check the envelope, and sure enough they did. And then it did have the right postmark, and so they were like, okay, you don't have to pay that penalty. So
that's
if you have
advice for everything, call.
Yeah.
If you ever get charged a fee, even if you did it, even if you were wrong, just call and say, this was my first offense. Can I get this
just be
waived?
really nice and be
just
like,
be really
oh,
nice.
My first time. And yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, having a receipt for your mail is really helpful. I think I haven't used registered mail, but somehow I got a receipt from the kiosk at the post office. You type in the zip code, and then it'll tell you, the receipt will say oh, zip code, blah, 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 you sent this on this date. I don't know if that's specific enough, but if there's a way to get a receipt, I think it's helpful.
A lot of times those receipts have tracking numbers on them too,
Yes.
which I think that's pretty valid. Karen's method is the most secure.
Yes.
I think keeping your receipts for important things, I think it's always especially tax wise, it's always a good idea to keep your receipts for, I think they recommend 3 to 7 years depending on what it is, but it's a great way to CYA.
It's also not that expensive.
Yeah.
And back everything up, right? Save a copy for yourself. All of that stuff. This is just what I think especially everyone so far, we all know what it's like to have someone question what we've done, and you'd be like, here it is. What are you going to say? Like, that has always been helpful. And Beena knows this from like lots of people being like, I had this thing and no one will listen to me. Like, please help me show that I'm not crazy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, to go back to your point, Karen, like if you do use TurboTax, be really careful, because I mean, we did this whole series at ProPublica last year about how TurboTax actually tries to trick you into paying. So like, that's why I put the tax guide in there, like understand like what your income is and whether, and like what that sort of qualifies you to do as far as filing your taxes, and like really like, you know, hold your tax prep service accountable. And like, if that's not what you're seeing, you know, we wrote the story and then a bunch of people like called TurboTax and then got money back. So like, don't hesitate to like take it to that extent, because this is your hard-earned money, and it's a stressful thing that we all have to do, but like there is a right way to do it, and we all deserve like that right way. So yeah. I know we have like a couple more minutes. Do we want to just kind of do some closing thoughts? This was really great. I took a bunch of notes because I learned a lot of and I'm gonna drop it in a Google Doc so others can see it. But like, what closing thoughts do we have? I mean, we touched on a lot of things like budgeting and credit cards and self-care and taxes and being a freelancer. Like, what, maybe even to just close it off, like what do you wish somebody maybe had told you, or what lasting advice has been really helpful for you all on the topic of money management?
For me, I would say knowledge is power. I wish that I had known how acceptable it is to talk to trusted people about money, about salary, about how to do your taxes, all this kind of stuff. Like for a long time, I felt very shameful about how little I knew, and also didn't know how to find out more information to increase that knowledge. So please know that like within the AAJA network and within, you know, this group of friends, we're willing to talk with you guys and just to offer our personal advice.
Yeah, Hannah is my person for this. there are like 3 topics that are widely accepted as being taboo that one should never talk to anyone about, and Hannah is my person to talk to about all of them, but especially when it comes to money matters. Earlier you mentioned Schwab. I use Schwab because Hannah recommended it to me. And I think I may have told you about Ally. I don't know if you were onto Ally before. Yeah, that was helpful, particularly because I was moving abroad and I needed to manage funds in the United States, and I wanted to have access. And that was the beginning of me moving into like non-traditional banking without a brick and mortar bank. So there was just a lot that I couldn't turn to my parents for. And the internet is this wild world of like, what can you trust, right? You know, so I think a couple of things that like really stand out for me now that I feel like, okay, I have people I can ask, or, you know, now I can build and grow. I wish I had started earlier with a lot of stuff. I wish I had talked to my friends about this before, because then I could, again, get a sense of where I am in comparison. Not that, I mean, comparison can be dangerous and scary because then I could beat myself up, but that's not it. But just to know that like, maybe I had other friends who were also putting aside money for retirement. I know that's something we didn't get a chance to talk about, but you know, some of the best retirement advice is start early. Today, the market is really terrifying to be starting, but in my non-professional point of view is now could be a great time to just put like minimal money into something just to start a retirement account, because when the market does recover, which hopefully it will, because it always does, you'll be in a much better place. And that, I don't know, these are just things that like I hadn't thought about before because I just didn't think I could, because I didn't think I had the money or the resources for it. But that's something that keeps coming up, is that, you know, with compound interest, the earlier you start, the better, even if it's something minimal. Never pay for anything. Don't get duped into, you know, paying for taxes, because the state of Florida and the state of Texas do not have state income tax, so you shouldn't have to pay for it. Just all these little things that I wish I had known earlier. And then the one that I kind of started off with in terms of budgeting is the best tool is the one you use. So no matter what it is, it only makes sense if you actually do it, if you put in the work and you actually do it. That's it. Gosh, it's quiet when everybody's mic is muted.
My advice is don't compare yourself to other people. When I say don't compare, I mean, that doesn't mean don't learn from other people, but I think it's never helpful. I think the thing about comparing, and I mean, the comparing comes with a big asterisk, which is like, always compare salaries, right? Like you want to get so much information about salaries and benefits and all that other stuff. But I think the comparing thing is really important because it's really easy to beat yourself up and be like, oh, I haven't invested as much as I should have. You know, like all those horrible things like you should have this much by the time you're 30, or this is the credit card to have, or all that other stuff. Or like, you know, why do I have more debt than other people I know, or budgets and all this other stuff. I think the thing is to remember everyone's situation is different. And especially what I've learned with personal finance is that there are so many things out of people's control that we are taught in American culture to beat ourselves up for. Like it's so much easier to hyperfixate on coffees and eating out than being like, why do women earn less than men? Or why are Black and Latino Americans discriminated in every area of lending? And like, why is it more difficult for even affluent Black Americans to get mortgages? Like those are bigger things. So like, I think that perspective check is really helpful. Like I am in a different financial position than my sister because I made different life choices regarding my career in my life. Like she has a house and I traveled more, but I also spent $6,200 on a work visa. Like those are just different things. And I think the thing to remember is that no one's place is fixed, like for good and bad. Like you can always do both small and big steps to change where you are if you're not happy where you are. Like going back to the things about like, it can feel so big. Like if you really want to start saving a lot of money, I don't think like cutting out everything that you like to save money is helpful. Like you said, the small steps, but also like don't underestimate what you can do is really important in terms of changing how much you earn or how much you save or shifts in your lifestyle. And then I think also going back to what Hannah said about knowledge being powerful, I think it's also just about remembering like what is the point of that knowledge, right? Like if you become a super expert in credit cards and you don't sign up for any of them, like then it's like you become that point person for your friends, but is that really helpful to your own life? I think that's really important. Like I am right now learning a lot about salaries and negotiation because it's very important. When people ask me, they're like, what are your salary expectations? And I counter and I say, I need to know about other aspects like responsibilities of this role and your company's culture regarding things like working from home and vacation and paid leave before I can give you an answer. Like, right? Like those are the kinds of things regarding personal finance. And then just like I said, going back, it's just like reminding yourself like what's really important. Like there for women especially, and like for everybody watching, like having a savings account enables you to turn down things that you don't want to do. Like that can be anything from like never booking basic economy on flights, or like leaving a job that you really don't like, or booking a hotel instead of an Airbnb. Like those kinds of things are like, that's what your budget is supposed to be for, is so that you can have a life closer to what you want. And I think that's really important. And those are the, hopefully, we are always accessible, right? Like that's what this group was for. But I want everyone to know, like, I think those are the things that I've learned, especially covering business and personal finance and culture. But like everyone said, I just know it from like literally helping people fix their bank accounts for 3 years.
Thank you. And thank you so much to Hannah, Lauren, and Karen. We really appreciate the time and all of the helpful advice and the thoughtfulness that you bring to this topic that I think we're all like evolving as far as kind of where we're at with it. But I definitely feel like I personally am in a better place tonight after listening to your wisdom. So thank you for that. And then thank you for everyone who joined the call or who might be watching this a bit later. Hope it was helpful. If you have any other questions, that's what the group is for. Feel free to post in there or message any of us, and we would be happy to get those answered. And we'll also put some of these links into a Google Doc, and then we'll open it up. And so if other folks want to add things that have been helpful for them, that can just kind of be the crowdsourced place where maybe we can keep dropping other money management suggestions. But I hope everyone has a really nice night and stay healthy, and we will all talk soon.
Thank you, everyone.